The video that ruined our lives started as a cheap attempt to ride a trend that was already everywhere on TikTok. My boyfriend Gustav and I ran a channel where we explored strange places, tested viral apps, and chased trends. When the Randonautica trend came back, Gustav insisted we should try it because the numbers on those videos were huge again. The app generates random coordinates and claims you might find something meaningful or disturbing if you follow them. We both thought it was nonsense, but nonsense that could easily turn into millions of views if something unusual happened on camera. The location it gave us was a quiet stretch of beach about an hour from the city, far from tourist areas and mostly empty, even during daylight. That kind of isolation worked well for filming because there were no interruptions, no curious strangers, and no background noise except the ocean and the wind. At that moment, we were excited in a normal way, the same energy we had before any new upload. If someone had told me that this trip would end with police tape, I would have laughed because nothing about that gray afternoon looked important or dangerous. We began recording as soon as we stepped onto the sand because viewers like to see the entire journey toward the coordinates. Gustav spoke to the camera while I followed the GPS marker, adjusting our direction whenever the arrow shifted. The beach looked empty enough that our voices carried easily over the sound of the waves. After several minutes of walking, I noticed something dark ahead, near the waterline that did not match the natural shapes around it. At first I assumed it was debris from a boat or a large container washed ashore, but the outline looked too straight and deliberate to be random trash. As we approached, both of us slowed down, because the object was clearly a large suitcase lying on its side in the wet sand. One corner was partly buried, and the tide kept reaching it before sliding back again, leaving a dark outline around the shell. The sight felt wrong in a way that neither of us could explain, but the camera was still recording, so we kept moving closer. Gustav suggested that someone might have lost it, or that it had fallen from a ship. Yet his voice sounded strained as he spoke, because the suitcase looked heavy and intentionally placed rather than accidentally abandoned. We exchanged a brief look that said we were both thinking the same thing, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud. We stood next to the suitcase for several seconds, while the wind pushed sand against our shoes and the water crept forward again. Neither of us touched it immediately because the situation had shifted from exciting to deeply uncomfortable, and the silence between us felt thicker than the air. I finally nudged the suitcase with my foot to see if it would move easily, but it barely shifted despite the wet sand beneath it. That small resistance made my chest tighten because luggage filled with clothes should not feel that solid. Gustav lowered the camera slightly, focusing on the latches while asking if we should open it. The decision felt heavier than it should have, as if we were about to cross a line we could not step back from. I crouched down and pulled at the bent latch while Gustav leaned closer to film. The metal snapped free with a dry sound that seemed too loud for such an empty place. When I lifted the lid slightly, something inside shifted with a dull, heavy movement that did not resemble normal objects. Gustav moved closer, trying to capture the interior on camera, and the moment the opening widened, a thick, rotten smell rushed out so strongly that he recoiled while covering his mouth. Inside were several black garbage bags packed tightly together, and one of them had split enough to reveal pale human skin pressed against the plastic. It took a second for my brain to accept what I was seeing, but once it did, I slammed the suitcase shut with both hands while Gustav stumbled backward, making a sharp sound that did not sound like anything I had heard from him before. For a few seconds, we just stared at the closed suitcase while the camera lay forgotten in the sand, recording our reaction. The reality of what we had found settled in slowly, bringing a cold sense of danger that had nothing to do with the ocean or the empty beach. Gustav said we needed to call the police immediately, and his voice trembled despite his effort to stay composed. I dialed emergency services while keeping my eyes fixed on the suitcase because the idea of turning away from it made me feel exposed. While I was on the phone, a wave surged farther than the others and struck the suitcase directly, pushing it slightly to one side. Gustav grabbed my arm and pulled me backward, clearly afraid that the lid might open again and expose what we had already seen. The minutes before the police arrived felt painfully slow, filled only with the steady rhythm of the sea and the distant cries of birds. When the flashing lights finally appeared, relief hit so hard that my legs felt weak, even though I had not moved much at all. Officers secured the area quickly and moved us away while asking how we discovered the suitcase. One of them opened it carefully while another blocked our view, but the expressions on their faces confirmed everything we already knew. The video began spreading online almost immediately because the recording had partially uploaded before we stopped filming. Within hours, millions of people had watched the moment we opened the suitcase, and news outlets started contacting us for interviews. 2 days later, Gustav returned to his apartment alone to collect some personal items while I stayed behind to handle calls from reporters. The building hallway looked normal when he arrived, quiet and unchanged, which made what happened next even more shocking. As soon as he stepped inside and closed the door, a man rushed from behind the entrance corner and grabbed his shoulder violently. He forced him against the wall and pressed a knife near his ribs, breathing hard as if he had been waiting there for a long time. "How did you find it? Who sent you there?" Gustav tried to speak steadily, even though the situation was terrifying, explaining that we used a random coordinate app and had no idea what we would discover. The man stared at him with intense suspicion and shook his head, clearly convinced he was lying. "Someone told you. You ruined everything." He repeated the truth, describing the trend, the filming, and the fact that millions of people use the same app without any control over where it sends them. Noise from neighboring apartments began spilling into the hallway because the struggle had not gone unnoticed. The man's focus shifted toward the door as voices grew louder outside, and his grip tightened as panic replaced his earlier control. Gustav continued speaking calmly, hoping to keep him from reacting violently while the sounds outside increased. Sirens approached in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. When the police arrived, the man shoved him to the floor and tried to escape through the hallway, but officers intercepted him almost immediately. Gustav remained inside, shaken but alive, while the chaos moved outside his apartment. Investigators later identified him as Michael Lee, the landlord of the 2 victims found in the suitcase. He had murdered Jessica and Austin after a dispute over unpaid rent and disposed of their bodies at the beach, believing no one would ever discover them. Michael Lee eventually confessed once the evidence against him became overwhelming, and the case drew massive public attention because of the viral video that documented the discovery. For viewers, it was shocking content, but for us it became a permanent shadow that followed everything we did afterward. I began receiving letters from him in prison, filled with anger and accusations that we had intentionally exposed him. Each letter repeated the same demand for an answer, insisting that someone must have guided us to that exact location. Michael Lee is still in prison, still sending letters, and still asking the same question. "Who sent you to the suitcase?" Michael Lee murdered his tenants, Jessica and Austin, after they fell behind on a rent payment, then hid their dismembered remains inside a suitcase and abandoned it. 3 teenagers later discovered the luggage and posted the find online without realizing it contained human remains. The video quickly went viral, reaching around 30 million views, which drew massive public attention and ultimately led investigators to the case.
If you want to understand how I ended up on the brink of death, you have to start with the part where success stops feeling real and starts feeling like something you must feed every day. I run a huge TikTok account built on eating things that look unsafe, disgusting, or borderline illegal, and the audience keeps growing because they're always waiting for the moment I finally go too far. At first it was fun, then it became income, and eventually it turned into a machine that never stops asking for something worse than yesterday. Brands send me products constantly, most of them novelty foods or strange imports, and I rarely turn anything down because every video means more exposure and more deals. My apartment looks like a storage unit filled with boxes, coolers, and half-open packages, and the smell changes depending on what I filmed that week. I stopped caring about nutrition or common sense a long time ago because neither of those things trends online. So, when an unknown company offered a large payment for a short series about eating expired products on camera, I treated it like any other risky promotion and signed immediately. The contract demanded full visibility of expiration dates and no editing cuts, which sounded perfect for shock value. I didn't research them properly because the money was already in my account, and at that point caution felt like a luxury for people without deadlines. The package arrived in a plain box with heavy tape wrapped around it. Some labels were faded, others had additional stickers placed directly over the dates so they'd be easy to read on camera, which made the whole presentation feel deliberate. It looked less like a random assortment and more like a curated collection of things no one should eat. Before recording the first video, I held one swollen jar in my hands longer than necessary, noticing the lid bulge slightly and make a faint clicking sound when pressed. I opened it, forced a smile, and started talking to the camera, as if nothing about the situation was unusual. The smell was sharp enough to sting my nose, but I kept going because backing out after pressing record would just look weak. Once the performance begins, you feel obligated to finish, no matter how bad the idea was. About an hour after uploading the first video, my stomach started hurting in a way that made it hard to stand upright, not like normal nausea, but like something twisting deep inside. I laid on the bathroom floor sweating while my phone buzzed nonstop with comments praising my commitment, and that contrast made the pain feel more isolating because no one could see the reality behind the clip. Turning off notifications didn't help because the vibration kept echoing in my head. Before opening the second item, I sat at the table staring at the sealed container while the pain from earlier lingered in dull waves across my abdomen. I considered stopping the series, but the contract penalties were severe, and the money had already been spent on rent and equipment upgrades. Admitting failure would not only cost financially, but also damage the fearless persona that made my account valuable. The second product was a cloudy drink that released a strange hiss when opened, and the liquid inside moved sluggishly as if thicker than water. I took a cautious sip, then a larger one for the camera, and immediately felt heat spread down my throat into my chest, followed by a heavy nausea that made my head spin slightly. Even then, I kept talking, forcing enthusiasm because thousands of views were already guaranteed. That night, I woke up suddenly, sitting upright, with acid burning my throat and my heart racing fast enough to make my chest ache. I recorded a quick clip out of habit, intending to use it as bonus content, but watching it back made me uneasy because I looked genuinely frightened instead of entertaining. It was the first moment I wondered if I'd misjudged something serious. The next morning, news broke about another creator collapsing during a live stream, and I recognized him as someone who had recently posted similar expired food challenges. The report blamed stress and dehydration, yet the timing felt too close to ignore, especially since his last video showed products that looked disturbingly similar to mine. Online comments were already speculating about dangerous sponsorships. Before filming the third video, I paced around my apartment, rereading the contract and searching for any trace of the company, hoping to find reassurance that this was just an edgy marketing campaign. The absence of information felt intentional, as if whoever organized it wanted no public footprint at all. That realization made continuing feel less like work and more like participating in something hidden. The third item was preserved meat, sealed so tightly it took real effort to cut open, and the smell that escaped was strong enough to make my eyes water instantly. I leaned away from the table, breathing through my mouth to avoid gagging, but then leaned back into frame because stopping would look suspicious. Every chew felt like forcing rubber down my throat while my body resisted. Midway through the recording, a sharp pain spread across my chest and into my back, making it difficult to sit upright. Yet I kept talking because fear of losing relevance outweighed physical fear in that moment. Messages began appearing saying I looked pale and unwell, which only increased the pressure to act normal. I ended the video quickly and spent the rest of the day lying still, hoping the sensation would fade. Another smaller creator was reported unconscious in his apartment, also known for extreme food content, and the pattern was becoming impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Discussion threads connected our recent sponsorships, pointing out how several of us had accepted deals from unknown sources offering unusually high payments. Reading those theories made my chest tighten with something closer to dread than pain. I studied my reflection in the dark screen and noticed how drained I looked compared to older videos where I seemed loud and energetic. My face appeared hollow, my lips dry, and there was a constant pressure behind my eyes that made focusing difficult. During the live stream, I displayed the remaining products and warned others about the sponsorship, explaining that something was clearly wrong. Instead of support, the chat filled with people mocking me for pretending to care only after getting paid, reminding me of past videos where I bragged about doing anything for money. That reaction made the situation feel hopeless, like I had lost credibility exactly when I needed it most. While speaking, the room began to tilt and my hands stopped cooperating, causing the table to shake as I tried to hold on to it. Breathing became shallow and uneven, and the sound of notifications merged into a loud, continuous buzz that drowned out my own voice. I slipped from the chair and hit the floor, aware that thousands were still watching but unable to move enough to stop the stream. I woke up in a hospital bed surrounded by machines, with a nurse explaining that viewers had called emergency services after seeing me collapse live. Tests showed severe inflammation, consistent with ingesting contaminated substances repeatedly over several days. Hearing that confirmed my fear that this was not a random illness, but a direct consequence of the sponsorship. Before I was allowed to use my phone, a television report mentioned influencer rivalries and suspicious deals targeting smaller competitors. Investigators revealed that the company behind the expired products functioned as a shell, with payments traced to accounts connected to a major creator in the same niche. The implication was clear, even without naming him directly.
My account was about being a Therian, about identifying as a wolf, about moving in ways that felt natural to me even if they looked strange to everyone else. And at the beginning, it felt like a safe corner where people understood instead of judging. I started posting because I felt less alone when I saw others doing the same thing, people who talked about feeling out of place in human spaces. When I copied those movements in my room and filmed them, the comments were supportive and warm, and for once, I did not feel like the weird one in the room. Over time, I connected with other Therians nearby, and we decided to meet in person once a week in a park near the forest, at the edge of town, a place far enough from houses that nobody complained and open enough that we felt safe being seen. Those meetings became the best part of my week, because nobody laughed and nobody tried to fix me. And when I posted clips from those gatherings, the comments filled with people saying they wished they had something like that too. It felt like building something fragile but real, like a small community that existed both online and in the physical world. Everything changed when one of my videos spread far beyond the usual audience, reaching people who did not want to understand and had no interest in being kind. At first, the insults were predictable, the kind of lazy cruelty people throw around when they want to feel superior. But the volume kept increasing until it felt like opening my phone meant stepping into a room full of people shouting at once. Then the messages became more specific and personal, with strangers describing how they would catch someone like me, how animal control deals with aggressive dogs, how easy it would be to follow someone home from a public park. Some of them sounded like jokes, but others read like instructions, and that difference made it hard to dismiss them as empty noise. I told myself that angry people online almost never act on what they say, and for a while that belief held together well enough for me to keep living normally. We still met in the park, although everyone checked their phones more often and looked over their shoulders when unfamiliar cars slowed near the entrance. What really unsettled me was an account that did not insult or threaten directly, but instead posted quiet videos of Therians from a distance, zoomed in from behind trees or parked vehicles, with captions that sounded like field notes rather than commentary. The comments under those videos talked about tracking patterns, ideal times to approach. The night before our next meetup, someone in our group chat shared screenshots from a private page linked to that account, showing maps of local parks marked with times and notes about how many targets usually gathered there. Nobody in the chat joked after that because it looked like planning. When we arrived at the park the following afternoon, the mood was tense in a way I had never experienced there before, but no one wanted to be the person who said we were scared enough to cancel. A dart struck the ground near us with a soft thud, and for a moment nobody reacted because it did not register as real. But then another one hit a tree at shoulder height, and someone shouted that they were tranquilizer darts. Panic spread unevenly, some people freezing, others bolting toward the open field, until figures stepped out from the trees, wearing dark outdoor gear and holding equipment that looked disturbingly professional. They moved in a wide line, simply advancing in a way that forced us backward toward the forest, as if they were guiding livestock into a pen. One of them raised what looked like a modified rifle and fired another dart, and the person it struck cried out and stumbled, clutching their arm as their legs began to weaken. We ran because there was nothing else to do, crashing through brush and branches, hearing footsteps behind us that did not sound frantic but controlled, paced, confident. People were shouting names, begging others not to split up, but the terrain forced us apart as we dodged trees and tripped over roots. I hid behind a fallen trunk with two others, trying to breathe quietly while footsteps passed somewhere nearby, accompanied by calm voices discussing positions and directions as if they were coordinating a search exercise. One of the voices said not to damage the merchandise, which made my chest tighten because it meant they did not see us as people at all. A girl from our group limped into view, moving slowly, eyes wide with pain, a dart embedded in her leg just below the knee. She tried to call for help but kept her voice low, afraid of being heard, and when a net suddenly dropped over her from behind, she screamed properly, thrashing and clawing as a second dart struck her side and her movements lost strength. I stayed frozen behind the trunk, watching as the person who captured her tightened the net and dragged her backward across the ground, her heels digging furrows in the dirt while she begged them to stop. Another figure stepped into view holding a flashlight and a phone, calmly recording as if documenting a successful hunt. After they disappeared into the trees, I crawled in the opposite direction until I found one of my closest friends crouched behind a dense patch of bushes, shaking so hard that the leaves around him rustled. He grabbed my sleeve and whispered that he had seen two people carried away already and that we needed to keep moving before they circled back. A beam of light swept through the trees, slow and methodical, and we ran again, trying to stay low while branches snapped under our feet. He tripped hard over a root and fell forward, hitting the ground with a sound that made me wince, and as he tried to push himself up, a dart struck his back with a dull impact. He gasped and reached for me, fingers gripping my arm weakly as his strength drained away, and I tried to pull him up, but his legs would not cooperate, and his weight kept sinking. Footsteps approached at a steady pace, and his expression shifted from panic to a kind of quiet resignation as he whispered for me to go, insisting that at least one of us needed to make it out. I backed into thicker brush, forcing myself not to make noise, even though every instinct screamed to stay with him, and watched through gaps in the leaves as two hunters reached him and rolled him onto his back. One checked his pulse while the other adjusted the dart, speaking in a tone that sounded annoyed rather than concerned, as if dealing with equipment that was not functioning perfectly. They lifted him together and carried him away without hurry, disappearing between the trees while discussing transport logistics and pickup times. I stayed hidden long after their voices faded, too afraid to move, because I kept expecting someone else to appear from another direction. Sirens eventually cut through the night, growing louder until flashing lights filtered between the trunks, and police officers spread through the forest, calling out that it was safe to come out. Even then, I hesitated because the idea of standing up and being visible felt unbearable after hours of trying not to exist. 2 members of our group were not found alive, and the news later confirmed that several attackers were arrested after investigators traced their online activity, including videos they had recorded during the assault. Authorities called it organized violence motivated by hatred, but hearing official words did not make the memories less sharp. My TikTok account remains online but inactive, frozen at the moment before everything collapsed, filled with comments from people asking if I'm okay or if I will ever post again. Sometimes I scroll through them late at night, stopping when I reach the newer messages that reference the attack, because those remind me how many strangers witnessed it from afar. New accounts with similar symbols still appear occasionally, posting vague messages about unfinished work or future outings. And even if they never mention us directly, the implication is clear enough to keep me alert. Once a week, I sit on my bedroom floor at the time we used to meet, stretching and moving carefully in the small space available. It is not the same as running freely under open sky, but it is the only version that feels remotely safe now, and safety has become more important than feeling understood.